Hi, this is Chris Young, and welcome to episode 10 of Contemplating Life. This week we conclude our look at Oscar-nominated films for this year with 3 of the best of the 10 films nominated for Best Picture. In the first episode of this series, I expressed my bias in favor of Avatar, which included its director, James Cameron. I have an even stronger affection for Steven Spielberg and his work. With multiple Oscar nominations over the years and 2 directing Oscars, as well as the prestigious Irvin G. Thalberg Memorial Award, Oscar loves Spielberg almost as much as I do. Before we get to one of Spielberg's nominated films, please indulge me as I reflect on his work and share with you my thoughts as to why his films illustrate what I find most enjoyable about the movies. Specifically, that although movies are an illusion, they allow us to explore feelings and themes that are very real to us. As a young boy, Spielberg was taken to the movies to see the 1952 Oscar-winning Best Picture, The Greatest Show on Earth, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. He mistakenly believed he was going to see a real circus instead of a movie about a circus. However, he was not disappointed by the experience. In fact, he was mesmerized by its ability to transport him to the world of that film. He was especially disturbed by a scene where a train collided with an automobile. To be able to cope with the image, he used his father's home movie camera to recreate the scene using toy trains and a toy car. Thus began his career as a filmmaker. His recreation wasn't that far off. The original film used model trains to shoot the effect. He followed that with other homemade films, one of which earned him a photography badge in the Boy Scouts. In my opinion, Spielberg is all about keeping it real. We see this theme of reality in a couple of my favorite films. In his 1977 Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there's a scene in which UFO investigator Claude Lacombe, played by Francois Truffaut, asks Roy Neary, played by Richard Dreyfuss, the following question.
Monsieur Neary, what do you want?
I just want to know that it's really happening.
He can't believe it's real. He can't believe he's really watching aliens step out of a real UFO. He wants to know it's real. And for us, it is very real. However, my favorite scene in a Spielberg film, and one of my favorite scenes in any film whatsoever, is in his 1982 hit E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Although you've probably seen the film, maybe more than once, let me set the scene for you. A young boy named Elliot discovers an extraterrestrial in his backyard. E.T. has been accidentally left behind by his people, and Elliot and his brother and sister assist E.T. to phone home. E.T. and Elliot develop a kind of psychic, empathic link in which they can feel what each other is feeling. When E.T. becomes ill, just as the government investigators move in, Elliot becomes ill as well. Fortunately, the link is broken, as E.T. apparently dies. In a heart-wrenching scene, Elliot says his final goodbyes to E.T.
You must be dead. Because I don't know how to feel. I can't feel anything anymore.
Note he doesn't say, I can't feel you. He says, I don't know how to feel. I can't feel anything. When the mothership approaches, E.T. is miraculously resurrected, and suddenly we can feel again. Elliot can feel again. Elliot and his brother steal a government van containing E.T. They pause briefly to say to their friends, Get the bicycles and meet us in the park. After a harrowing chase scene where they escape from the G-Men, they meet up in the park. Elliot and E.T. appear at the back door of the van, and his friends see E.T. for the first time. Elliot calmly explains,
Hey, he's a man from outer space, and we're taking him to a spaceship.
Well, can't he just beam up?
if you're watching the film in a theater, you might have missed the next line because everyone's laughing. But to me, it's the most important line in the film. To me, the most important line in any Spielberg film. Elliot says in disgust,
This is reality, Greg.
think about that line. Think about what it represents. Essentially, Elliot's saying, Greg, you fucking idiot. Don't you know when an extraterrestrial lands in your backyard and you develop a psychic empathic link with him and you help him phone home to be reunited with his people and you suffer the pain of losing him and experience the joy of his resurrection? That's more real than what is arguably one of the most beloved science fiction franchises in entertainment history, namely Star Trek. This is reality, you idiot, imbecile, moron, Greg. And we as the audience agree completely. While the scenario is pure fantasy, the emotional roller coaster that Spielberg's taken us on is completely, 100% real. We have developed a psychic, empathic link with the characters in the film. We feel what they feel. We experience on a very personal level what they experience. We know how to feel because we know how they feel. That's the true power of cinema when wielded by a master like Steven Spielberg. From the terror of Jaws to the wonder of Close Encounters, to the heartfelt emotions in E.T., to the horrors of World War II in Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. Spielberg is all about making it real. He creates that magic reality that he first experienced as a young boy the first time he went to the movies. In the final three completely fictional films that we discussed this week, one of which was directed and co-written by Spielberg, we're taken on journeys that feel completely real. First of all, we have Spielberg's own semi-autobiographical family drama, The Fabelmans. In outline form, the film exactly parallels Spielberg's own early life. Young Sammy Fabelman is taken to see his first film, The Greatest Show on Earth, and he similarly begins his career as an amateur filmmaker. I was in an online discussion, and I heard someone complain, I'm not going to see that film. I don't want to sit through 2 hours of self-indulgent, sentimental schmaltz explaining how Spielberg got to be the great filmmaker he became. Well, I had no expectations that's what I was going to see. Let me reassure you, that critic was 100% wrong. Instead, we get a deeply personal and somewhat tragic family drama as teenage Sammy, played by Gabriel LaBelle, uncovers a terrible secret about his mother who struggles with mental illness. She's brilliantly portrayed by Michelle Williams. While on a camping trip, he filmed something he'd never noticed before. Upon reviewing the footage, he's shocked at what he uncovered about his mother. It nearly destroys his relationship with her. When she finally pleads with him to explain why he turned against her, he shows her the footage of what he uncovered. The incident also nearly destroys his passion for filmmaking. His camera was seeing things he didn't want to see. His camera revealed a hidden reality that was too disturbing. Along the way, the family is also torn apart by his father, played by Paul Dano. His father uproots the family twice to move to a new city because he's offered better job opportunities as a computer engineer. Sammy's stress level peaks after the last family move that gets him out of the comfort he's experienced in the Hebrew schools and thrusts him into a public high school where he's confronted with terrifying and dangerous anti-Semitism. There's nothing heroic or self-aggrandizing about this intimate portrait of a family in turmoil. By the way, I was expecting lots of little Easter eggs, where some event in his life would go on to inspire his future films. While he did make a very dramatic war film at an early age and a sci-fi film, there aren't really any blatant references to his future work that I noticed. In addition to its Best Picture nomination, it won Golden Globe for Best Drama. Spielberg is also nominated for Original Screenplay and as director. He won the Golden Globe for directing the film and was nominated for a Globe for the screenplay. A total of 7 Oscar nominations include Michelle Williams as lead actress playing his mother, Judd Hirsch for a supporting actor in a memorable yet brief role as his uncle, and of course, John Williams is nominated for the musical score. SAG nominations were earned for the ensemble cast, for Paul Dano for his portrayal of the father, and Michelle Williams won the Best Actress in a Drama Golden Globe for the part. While it's not action-packed like Spielberg blockbusters, or is it as poignant or tragic as Private Ryan or Schindler, it's still a very highly compelling, realistic, and moving film that I highly recommend. With an estimated budget of $40 million and a worldwide gross so far of just over $31 million, it's far from a hit. It's still available to see in theaters, and it's available for purchase as a digital download from Amazon. Our second film this week is Tar. It stars Cate Blanchett in what I believe is the best actress performance of the year. Unfortunately, the film has earned only $13.4 million on an estimated budget of $30 million. It's currently streaming on Peacock TV. Blanchett plays Lydia Tarr, the conductor and music director of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, one of the most prestigious postings one can have in her field. While a couple of the films we've reviewed in this series wait until the end to bring out the memorable portions, near the beginning of this film, we start off with a spellbinding sequence of scenes that paints a detailed portrait of the title character. She's interviewed by the New Yorker in front of a live audience, sort of James Lipton style. Throughout that interview, that runs nearly 12 minutes of screen time, you completely forget you're watching an actress playing a role. You easily become convinced you're watching a real interview with an accomplished classical conductor and composer. The effect is absolutely stunning. The realism continues in the next extended scene, in which she has lunch with another conductor who's jealously trying to pick her brains about an amazing performance he heard. She insists that rather than mimic her techniques, he needs to find his own way. But she does eventually throw him a morsel of advice. Then, at the 25-minute mark of the film, we're treated to the most realistic and compelling performance I've seen in years, perhaps ever. She's guest teaching a class in conducting at Juilliard. A young violinist and conducting student named Max conducts an avant-garde piece. She says, okay, that was nice. Now, why didn't you think of something like Bach?
Why not a Kyrie? You know, like something like Bach's Mass in B minor.
I'm not really into Bach.
You're not into Bach.
She's stunned and asks,
Have you ever played or conducted Bach?
Honestly, as a BIPOC, pangender person, I would say Bach's misogynistic life makes it kind of impossible for me to take his music seriously.
Come on. What do you mean by that?
Well, didn't he sire like 20 kids?
Yes, that's documented, along with a considerable amount of music. But I'm sorry, I'm unclear as to what his prodigious skills in the marital bed have to do with B minor.
throughout the remainder of the scene, she passionately illustrates the magnificence of Bach while deconstructing his politically correct fueled argument. She explains to him,
But you see, the problem with enrolling yourself as an ultrasonic epistemic dissident is that if Bach's talent can be reduced to his gender, birth country, religion, sexuality, and so on, then so can yours. Now, someday, Max, when you go out into the world and you guest conduct for a major or minor orchestra, you may notice that the players have more than light bulbs and music on their stands. They will also have been handed rating sheets, the purpose of which is to rate you. Now, what kind of criteria would you hope that they would use to do this? Your score reading and stick technique, or something else?
it's a brilliant argument for separating the art from the artist. The discussion is very timely, considering the current controversy raging about J.K. Rowling and her toxic anti-trans views, and the attempts to boycott or cancel the entire Harry Potter franchise. Cartoonist Scott Adams is also in trouble for his cartoon Dilbert, which has been pulled from hundreds of newspapers because of his racist and misogynistic comments. One of the amazing things about this scene is that it lasts a full 10 minutes and is one continuous Steadicam shot that follows her around the room. There's no opportunity for the typical long take tricks such as masking a cut as you walk through a doorway, or a whip pan that blurs the transition between takes. I'm 100% certain that what you're witnessing is a single, continuous 10-minute shot. While many films have used such a technique to heighten the realism of a scene, and this one certainly does so, there's another reason the director ensures that we witness the scene exactly as it happens. I won't spoil what that reason is. While this hyperrealism only lasts for the first 35 minutes of the 2-hour and 37-minute film, the rest of the story feels real and true. The next section of the film covers her preparations to produce a live recording of Gustav Mahler's iconic Fifth Symphony. During those preparations, she learns that a former student has committed suicide. This student had accused her of a manipulative and inappropriate sexual relationship. A rampant scandal ensues. From there onward, her career and her relationship with her wife and young daughter slips into a downward spiral that completely tears her life apart. Now, in my as yet unsuccessful attempts to publish my own fiction, I've learned that one of the axioms of the trade is show, don't tell. That's a skill I haven't quite mastered. What it means is don't use exposition to tell us what a person is thinking or feeling or what it means to them. Rather, write a scene that illustrates these things. Let the audience figure it out. The remainder of the film, especially near the end, is a masterclass of showing rather than telling. So much so that there are huge gaps in the plot. I'm not talking about plot holes in the traditional sense of the phrase, which is that there are inconsistencies in the plot. Rather, I mean the events of the story are completely skipped, and we're only shown her reaction to these events and the consequences of them. In many instances, we never learn what really happened, but it doesn't matter. The story is not about the events. The story is about the huge cost that those events impose on her. The film earned 6 Oscar nominations, including the Best Actress for Blanchett, and I'll be disappointed if she doesn't win. She already earned the Actress in a Drama Golden Globe for the performance and is nominated for individual SAG Award. Todd Field is nominated for directing and his original screenplay. It's also nominated for cinematography and film editing, the latter of which I find ironic because the most memorable scene is an unedited 10-minute take. If you're a Peacock TV subscriber, please watch at least the first 35 minutes of this film. Also note, you might be able to get Peacock TV for free. Check with your cable provider. When you see this film, you're in for a real acting masterclass, and you'll learn a little bit about classical music along the way. If you can tough it out through her chaotic downward spiral, you'll be treated to an especially delicious ending. Just don't let the holes in the narrative bother you. What happened isn't important in this film. What happens afterwards is. We conclude our journey of the 10 Best Picture nominees with women talking. It's probably the least seen of the 10 films, released only in US and Canada, with a gross so far of only $3.7 million. It's currently available only in theaters. Based on the novel by Miriam Toews, which is in turn inspired by actual events, women in a Mennonite religious farming community were drugged and raped repeatedly by men in their community. The facts behind the true story are that over a period of 4 years, 130 women and children, aged 3 to 60, in the colony were drugged with animal tranquilizer and raped. Although many of them became pregnant, the men insisted they had either imagined the assaults or they occurred by ghosts or demons. When 2 of the men were caught in the act, the men were initially punished internally by the community, but were eventually turned over to the police. And after 2 years, 7 of the 8 accused were convicted, and the 9th evaded capture. There's no claim that the events depicted in the novel or the film are anywhere close to what actually occurred, just that the premise is inspired by the actual facts. At the beginning of the film, there's a pop-up message saying, "What follows is an act of female imagination." While that parallels the excuse that the women were imagining things and were gaslighted into believing it wasn't real, what it says to me is that writer-director Sarah Polley is depicting what she wishes had happened in the aftermath of the assaults. Whether the story is factually accurate or not, it realistically depicts the dilemma that the women in the situation faced. In the film, while the men are away at a nearby town trying to bail out the 8 men responsible for the rapes, the women gather to decide what to do. They vote on 3 options: stay and do nothing, stay and fight, or leave. An initial vote is a tie between stay and fight or leave. So they appoint a group of about 10 of them together in the hayloft of a barn and decide between the 2 options for the entire group. They're assisted by a trusted, sympathetic young man from the colony named Austin, played by Ben Whishaw. His job is to take the minutes of the meeting because none of the women can read or write. The ensemble cast is led by Runa Mari, Claire Foy, Sheila McCarthy, and Judith Ivey, with a brief appearance by Frances McDormand. All of them give phenomenal performances, but I was most impressed by the younger members of the cast, Liv McNeil, Kate Hallett, and Michelle McLeod. While much of the time the children remain in the background as the adult women deliberate, there are moments where these youngsters hold their own against their more experienced cast members in very dramatic moments. The problem these women face is that their faith dictates that their participation in the colony is the pathway to salvation. To leave the community to which they're dedicated is to risk their soul. They also preach a message of pacifism and forgiveness. Any violence they commit, even in their own defense, as well as any lack of forgiveness, is contrary to their core values. Although the women have lived their entire lives isolated in the colony, and they are illiterate, they know Scripture and the tenets of their faith deeply. They argue eloquently over the theological and moral questions they're facing. At times, I found myself perhaps hearing the voice of the modern author rather than these seemingly unsophisticated women. But then again, on further reflection, their arguments are not based on any modern feminist ideology, but they are rooted deeply in the theological tenets of their faith. It's completely credible that they're well versed in those principles. Had you not known the true story behind the events, you wouldn't know the time or place of the film until about a third of the way through, when a man driving a pickup truck drives through the community with a loudspeaker blaring music and asking residents to come out and be counted for the 2010 census. The actual events occurred from 2005 through 2009 in Bolivia. I can't imagine how someone who's experienced domestic abuse or sexual assault is going to feel about the film. As a man who's never experienced such horrors personally, naturally I entered the story through the eyes of Austin, the young man who takes the minutes of the meeting. Like Austin, I know what it's like to feel powerless to be helpful to women who've experienced such horror. You can see his anguish as he wants to help, yet he knows that ultimately it's their decision to make. He has no input. When he does, on rare occasions, venture to make a comment, some of the women harshly admonish him to stay out of it. Then on another occasion, when he is directly asked for input, he defers, saying, "I don't matter in this discussion." One of the women replies, "Imagine your entire life was like that, where nothing that you thought or felt matters anywhere, anytime." That's just one of dozens of poignant and heart-wrenching moments in the film. If I were to apply my typical critique of the plot, the way I do on sci-fi or fantasy films, the story itself doesn't hold up at all. It's way too convenient that all the men, except one sympathetic one with the skills that they need, will leave the colony for more than a day, giving them the freedom to debate their own fate. Similarly, once the decision is made, and I won't spoil what it was, we don't see much of what happens afterwards. And any speculation we have about what happens leads to so many unanswered questions, it could spoil your experience. But ultimately, the story is not about the facts of the situation. What led up to the meeting and what happened afterward isn't important. As the title suggests, it's only about women talking about taking control of their lives, staying true to their values and beliefs, and protecting themselves and their children, both physically and spiritually. So you can't judge it for its plot holes. While it can be difficult to watch at times, it succeeds in creating that E.T.-like connection between the audience and the characters. We feel what they feel. We struggle along with them. There are even a few lighthearted moments that break the tension and come as a much-needed relief to us and to the women of the story. Although it's not my favorite, if it wins, I will not be disappointed. So that concludes my look at the 10 Best Picture nominees for the year. Although I had some problems with 4 of them, in the end, I think they probably are worthy of their nominations. Even those that I found problematic had some extraordinary performances. Each of these 10 films succeeds on some level in creating that E.T.-like empathic link between the characters and us as the audience. While the plot, the premise, or the setting of these films might be completely unrealistic, the way they make us feel is totally real. And that's what movies are all about. I'm sorry I haven't had time to see any of the other films that earned acting Oscar nominations, but were not in the 10 Best Picture list. When I get a chance, I'll try to watch those films and perhaps do a bonus episode after the Oscars. Here's a brief recap, counting down from the film I liked the least to the one I liked best. That's not necessarily me making odds on which films are most likely to win. Coming in at number 10, All Quiet on the Western Front, a brutally realistic depiction of the hopelessness and futility of war. Perhaps it was too real for my taste. Number 9, Triangle of Sadness. Even if we take the story as 3 distinct, loosely related narratives rather than a continuous story, the first third seemed pointless. The middle third, even though it had some memorable, gross, funny scenes, wasn't that great. And it was only the last third that made me feel the extent to which indulgent, arrogant rich people abuse and demean everyday workers. Number 8, The Banshees of Inisherin. People I respect say this was their favorite film of the year, and I don't deny it's a quality piece of filmmaking. The performances are top-notch and worthy of their own nominations. We can't help but feel connected to the characters' emotions. However, the premise just doesn't work for me. I never understood why these 2 people were friends in the first place, or if they were, why everything changed so suddenly. I tried unsuccessfully to apply the same logic I applied to Tar and to Women Talking by saying it's not about why these former friends feuded. It's just about the consequences of their feud. Ultimately, I just couldn't make that leap. The argument that it's a metaphor for the Irish Civil War doesn't save it. Go ahead and give the Oscars to the actors if you have to, and maybe the screenplay, the cinematography, and directing. But this is not the best picture. Number 7, Everything Everywhere All at Once. With Golden Globe wins, the most Oscar nominations of any film, and hundreds of other lesser nominations, I still feel this is much ado about nothing. It had a few very funny, memorable moments, and there were parts of the acting that was notable, but not up to the level of anything like Banshees. Again, I feel that for this type of over-the-top, quirky action comedy, I like Bullet Train much better. I never did feel anything for these characters until the last few minutes of the film, and by then, I didn't care much anyway. Number 6, Tar. The first 35 minutes of the film gave me the most memorable acting performance of the year, and I will be severely disappointed if Cate Blanchett doesn't win. This performance will stick with me for a long time. Number 5, Women Talking. The screenplay and performances in this film, as well as the topic, inspire part of me to wish it would win Best Picture. If there's a dark horse in the bunch, this is it. It is in no way an enjoyable experience, but it is compelling and real despite the plot problems previously discussed. You should see this film, but don't plan on it being a fun experience. Number 4, The Fabelmans. Spielberg on Spielberg. Of course I loved it. No, it's not E.T. or Jaws or Schindler, but it's still quality filmmaking by the master. Number 3, Top Gun Maverick. Objectively, this maybe shouldn't even have gotten a Best Picture nomination. It only ranks here because of how much fun I had watching it. If you're talking Oscar-worthy filmmaking, it might not make the top 10, but I really had a good time. Number 2, Elvis, a beautifully crafted biopic of a legendary performer. Memorable performances all around. If it's not going to be Avatar on top, this was my favorite of the year. While I didn't so much feel emotionally attached to the characters, I did feel like I was realistically a witness to history. And finally, of course, at number 1, Avatar, The Way of the Water. I'm desperately trying to find some objectivity in this film that I love so much subjectively. So let's say you can't deny it's a phenomenal achievement in filmmaking. It's 3 hours of eye candy and action, and the story is much better than the original Avatar. I not only felt totally immersed in this alien world, I cared about the characters. It checks all my boxes and remains my favorite. Now that's the order in which I like the films. If I had to rank them for Oscar worthiness, I would still go with Avatar, followed by Women Talking, Elvis, Fableman, Banshees, and Tar. I won't bother to rank the rest. Hey, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Quick breaking news before we finish. The Screen Actors Guild Awards were presented on February 26th, with Everything Everywhere All at Once sweeping nearly everything. It won Best Ensemble Cast, Lead Actress for Michelle Yeoh, Supporting Actor for Ke Huy Quan, Supporting Actress for Jamie Lee Curtis. Lead Actor Award went to Brendan Fraser for The Whale, and we'll try to review that film as soon as we get the opportunity. I heard good things about it. So I'm disappointed that Women Talking or Kate Blanchett didn't get any awards, but that was their picks. We'll see what happens on Oscar night. In our next episode, we will continue the story of my faith journey. When we last visited the topic, I was 19 years old and had just left the Catholic Church. After we explore that topic for a few episodes, we'll return to disability issues with the history of my experiences in special education. I'm also looking for some interview opportunities that we might throw in along the way. If you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You'll get early access to the podcast and any other benefits I might come up with down the road. It's not that I'm desperate for money, but a little extra income sure could help. As always, a huge thanks to my Patreon supporters. Your support means more to me than words could possibly express. And even if you can't provide financial support, please, 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 please post links and share the podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. I'll see you next week as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe.